All right, let's kick off our meeting if everybody is ready. And I will read for Tim and Ian since they're not attending. Tim says, in what went not so well, I felt a little under the weather this week and it was hard to function. We did talk about that, and he definitely felt like he was doing great work to me, but I know how that feels. And then Ian said, hit some technical snags with the survey, which slowed down research. I think there's a mention of that today in Ian's stand-up if people want to see and ask him about what happened. And I think you're up next, Steve.
Yep. Few notes from me. After working with the intention of pushing small merge requests in Conan, I still ended up with one big merge request that needs to be broken up. So that wasn't the greatest. And then in addition to that, just with Conan in general, I've kind of started to catch myself trying to talk myself into like working more hours and longer, which I just need to be more aware of and not necessarily do, because that's not the solution for that kind of a problem. Let's see, I'm still writing, or well, I got kind of stuck writing the test for the Conan workhorse route, which is in Go. It's just proven a little more difficult than I expected. I did get a good start on it with some help, but after I've written it out, it's not passing, so I'll probably need to get a little bit more help on that. And then lastly, the install functionality, or like the downloading of the packages in Conan, is not as straightforward as I had originally thought. So it's likely I'll have to dig back into the Conan Python code again to kind of understand what's going on there.
Cool, thanks, Steve. And for my what went not so well is I've not been feeling super well this week either. Just felt really low energy, which has been a bit of a bummer. I've been trying to sort of focus on the priority stuff, but it's been really hard to feel all awake and things. And then we've been having some odd issues with hiring. Having a candidate that was extremely like a good fit and everyone was excited about, and then to have some issues come up through the process was pretty frustrating. And then going back to hiring again, and yeah, it hasn't been as fast as the earlier version when I first hired everyone for the team. So and then John wrote in here for async that he'd been super busy, but thanks to everyone for all the backup and patience. Steve, do you want to read Tim's what went well, please?
Yeah. Preparing for the hackathon and presenting was cool, and I really enjoyed being involved in the whole process. It also feels like we're starting to wrap our heads around data instrumentation, and soon we'll be able to make decisions based on data and metrics. I do Ian's as well. Started to understand the GitLab way. It's always a good one.
Okay, so for me then, I made some good progress on the package detail page and converting that into Vue. I've got it working. It's going through review at the minute, and there's been quite a lot of feedback from that. So it's just working its way through maintainer feedback. It's another one of these things where package is a little bit different from everywhere else. So it's just we just gotta accept some compromises there, I suppose, in the code. But overall, it's good. And likewise, I've made a lot of good progress on the sorting component as well. I worked pretty closely with another front-end engineer in that. We went back and forth discussing various implementation details and best ways to do things, and options as well. So I wrote one of the components in a traditional Vue.js way, and then we decided we could try doing that functionally. And I think that's the first functional component in there now. So that was pretty cool. And overall, it was just really good to work with another front-end engineer and make some good progress.
Cool. I have sort of signed up preliminarily as a database reviewer and so eventually trainee maintainer. And so I worked through the sort of initial curriculum and prerequisites for that, which was a lot of fun. And I'm excited to get started reviewing some database issues next week, hopefully. In addition to that, I worked through quite a few backend reviews this week that I'm starting to feel more comfortable with, and I feel like they went well. I'm just feeling more confident in general, kind of jumping into random areas of the code base I've never seen and sort of quickly catching on to what's going on in those areas. And last, I've made some good progress on Conan this week, and it just overall felt very good and productive.
Nice. Glad to hear that. And for myself, I'm feeling good that I'm ahead of where we need to be in planning, from, what we're looking at building in the future and working on a couple of things there. And particularly, Tim's pretty great in that regard. So glad that's working well. I'm interviewing again, or still, maybe is probably the way to describe it, which I really enjoy. I like interviewing. It's always really fun for me to sort of meet people and try and work out whether they'll be a good fit. And finding explanations for what we missed in our last milestone is pretty interesting to me, and sort of looking at what the issue was and how to resolve that. That's pretty fun. Not ideal, but still fun. And I'll read for John. Our second front engineer starts in a couple of weeks, which is pretty exciting. We have a plan of attack for that person, which I believe we've gone over. So that should be hopefully relatively smooth, but expect another person to come along. John also says that we had some great chats around 12.4 and then had an awesome coffee chat with Steve. Thanks, Steve, he says. Cool. So we got through this relatively quickly. Does either of you have any questions or thoughts about where you might get some help here, particularly, that you want to call out?
Not in particular.
I was, seeing as this is a good opportunity to talk to both of you, I have a question. I need some back-end help, basically, with one of my merge requests, and I was wondering if I could ask either of you two to take a look at some point.
Yeah.
Cool. I think it's a really simple thing. I just don't know how to do it in the Ruby on Rails way. So basically, I need some kind of path being passed through the JSON object to the front end, and I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out how to do it, because it's not just it's basically on the package file. Each package file will have a download link, and I need that being attached to each package file object, and I just couldn't figure out how to do that in Rails. So it seems pretty straightforward, but everything.
So you need a way to sort of generate that downloadable URL link.
Yeah, there seems to be a function that could be called in the HAML that does produce it, but for whatever reason I can't attach it to the list of file objects. I can only just send it as a singular object, so a singular string, which isn't too helpful.
Gotcha. Yeah, if you want to send me a link to where that is in the code, I can take a look and hopefully refamiliarize myself with HAML.
Okay, cool. I'll Slack you that at some point then.
Cool. All right. Generally speaking, Nick, I know it's come up before where you've sort of needed back-end support. Do you think a model where you just kind of call it out and like you stand up or a retro and just ask for help on a case by case is going to work for you right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this particular issue was called out by the maintainer actually, because what I did is because the string is fixed every single time, I just generated it on the front end and just changed the one bit. The maintainer called that out, saying that's not standard practice and we don't do that like anywhere else in the code. And it's usually, and I guess that's correct, because if the string changes, then probably the back end that should be changing it rather than the front end. So yeah, this particular issue, like just the calling out like this, is probably okay. However, I have got some issues in 12.4 where I believe it's going to require back-end work. So I've passed those over to John to take a look at, and we've got a chat scheduled next week to discuss what to do with those particular issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think probably what makes sense is flagging those issues somehow, whether with a label or something like that, so that we can start looking at them, or even just as the simple solution is to maybe just put them straight in the retro once we kick off. Excuse me, in your stand up once we kick off, just to sort of flag them as something you might need help with, and then just sort of getting some time. I think right now a lot of that falls to Steve because he's our proximate engineer who has an overlapping time zone with you. But that's not to say that if we recognize those things up front that we can't sort of have Gigi take a look at them where necessary, or potentially reach out more broadly than that. So I appreciate you passing over to John. I generally prefer people to just work it out between themselves and not require managers, but that's kind of been my model. So that's what I said last time this came up, right? Is like, if you need Steve's help, then ask Steve, and Steve should understand what he needs to get done, whether he can allocate, half an hour or 2 hours or a day or whatever might be needed. So, but I think the pattern is what I'm more concerned about, whether you are blocked on a lot of different things. So knowing that ahead of time is valuable,
Yeah, I think so. Like the 12.4 issues specifically, why I went through John is because I don't think they're just like simple half-hour things for Steve to look at. Like, I think they're actually actual pieces of work that require to be in place before, like, not necessarily before the front end is done, but certainly before it can be completed. Like, for example, one of the tickets is to delete individual package registry files from my uploaded package. I don't believe, I can't see any code that allows that to happen. Now that doesn't say that, that might exist somewhere and I just might not know where to look. But yeah, it seems to me that I couldn't find it. Therefore, I suppose I believe that there's going to be some back-end work to build that piece of code in.
Yeah, okay. Those things, what would be useful to me as far as the planning goes is to sort of understand what they were. And John already knows by the time you already raised the issue. And I didn't, just to be 100% clear, I wasn't sitting here thinking, he just didn't try or anything like that. And I'm not saying you think that, but I just want to be super clear that that's not the case. I know you to be a very capable human, so just to be super clear, what I think, we prioritize issues mostly around the product priorities. And then once we do that, we say, okay, well, we need these things done. And then probably what we need to do is just identify these issues. We're doing very lightweight estimation as well. So we're not necessarily digging in until like this point. So I'm trying to figure out a good way where we can just sort of engage, whether that's Steve or Gigi or someone, just take a look at that issue and identify if there is something blocking. We can parallel path it, or we have to move that work out further. Is kind of, again, it's sort of trying to be very lightweight right now. You want to say something, Steve?
I don't remember.
Sorry.
It does remind me, though, I was going to ask at some point, was there sort of like, we had kind of talked about like, starting to use weights, but then, and then it was kind of said like, just kind of start using some, but I feel like we never decided on which system we wanted to use, so that we're all using the same one. So I don't know if that's worth, certainly we don't have to bring this up now, but it's just something that was on my mind.
Yeah, it's been on my mind as well. And I think, what I was hoping for was through the last milestone we did, we could identify where we were having misses based on the fact that we're doing this really kind of like, oh yeah, this seems like a kind of weighting, which is super lightweight, right? And that's something that I'm not seeing. So I think I'm happy to do some sort of estimation process, as we sort of sign off and kick off on our new milestone, and then you work for that milestone. I'm happy to sort of spend, as you get online, because obviously I'm thinking about async process here, as you come online, taking a look at the issues that you feel like you might, that are actually in the milestone, and working through that, spend like time box for an hour or two, or however long you think you need to sort of come up with an estimate. And really, it's really looking for dependencies. I think the issue we have with estimates that I've seen from other EMs and the way teams work is that some teams have a really heavy estimation process, and it doesn't actually bear, it doesn't end up resulting in more predictability. So that's why I went the really lightweight method to start off, was kind of like, yeah, it feels like this, but if there's a gap here, which it sounds like there is, then let's start like looking at.
Yeah, I think I like the whole lightweight, like, yeah, it feels like this, but I think we should have like a common set of numbers we're using for that feel. Like, rather than like, I might be using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Nick might be using 1, 3, 5, 7, 10. And so like, how would you notice the difference? that would be my that's my question is, for this lightweight, it feels like something, maybe just like decide on a set of numbers that kind of represents whatever.
Well, I mean, that's, the numbers aren't actually a sort of a GitLab pattern, generally speaking, either. Generally, people use T-shirt sizes for this reason, because it is generally kind of focused more around, hey, let's just get throughput going, let's get velocity up, more than predictability. So that's part of the reason why I'm like, hey, I don't want to get too heavily into this given how small the team is. So, but if the consistency is the concern, I'm adding an action item to the retro. If consistency is the concern, that's totally fine. We can do that.
Yeah, I think the main concern was like, if I'm using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and someone else is using 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, then my 3 is different than their 3, like in what we mean. Like my 3 means like, this is a pretty big one, and their 3 means, oh, it's a small one.
Yeah, and I think my suggestion would be not to use numbers at all, unless we are all really kind of, if everyone in the team is like, yeah, we prefer numbers, and whatever, that's fine. I'm not going to be prescriptive about that. But if we were going to sort of normalize on something, then most people use T-shirt sizes here. And that would make it more compatible with other people taking a look at our issues in a milestone, and they could make more sense of it. So from a collaboration standpoint, I think that's better to sort of normalize there if we're not particularly feeling like a numbering system is the way to go.
Yeah, let's do T-shirt sizes. I like that.
All right, that works for me. I'll add that to our team page, I guess, for T-shirt sizing. Anything else anyone wants to mention on this?
Not specifically on that, but actually like a side note for Nick, that I had a question that it looks like actually you already answered, because I'd like asked a small question in an issue, but now I see you just answered it, so never mind.
Yeah.
These are not the droids you're looking for. All right, so any other questions or anything anyone wants to discuss here before we end?
No, I'm good.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Remember, Nick, just to be clear, Monday is a public holiday in the States. So a lot of us will be probably unavailable on Monday. So that's true for Steve and for Tim and myself. So just to be heads up.
I'm going to try to not open the computer. Let's see.
I mean, that'll be in the retro if you do. Come on, let's be honest. All right. Thanks, peeps.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.